My name is Audrey Thompson. I'm 30 years old, a single mother, and according to my family, a shadow that never quite grew into a person worth noticing. If you asked my parents, they'd tell you I was always the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one who just needed more time to figure things out. I used to believe that, too, that maybe I just wasn't made for the spotlight like my younger brother, Derek. That maybe some people were born to shine and others were just background. Derek is 27, tall, clean-cut, charming in the way only someone used to applause can be. He was always the one who got the best parts of our parents, my mother's softness, my father's pride. From childhood through college, he was their miracle kid. Every A- on his report card was treated like a national holiday. When he made JV soccer, my parents threw him a backyard party with banners and cupcakes. When I graduated early with a double major while raising a daughter and holding 2 jobs, my father said, "You finally caught up." He smiled when he said it, as if that made it less cruel. I'm not bitter. At least, I wasn't. I kept telling myself this was normal. Families aren't perfect. Maybe my parents were just tired when I came along. Maybe Derek really did need more from them. Maybe I was too quiet, too accommodating, too nothing special to make a fuss about. I let those thoughts root inside me like weeds. I wore politeness like armor. I didn't complain when Derek got the family's full attention, or when my daughter Lily was left out of holiday photos because the lighting wasn't great. I even tried laughing when Derek called me Saint Audrey the Invisible at Thanksgiving last year. But the truth, I wasn't laughing. Not even close. I remember the exact moment things shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a phone call from my Aunt Martha's suite. Chatty, always full of energy. "Audrey, honey, just checking you're still coming to Derek's graduation dinner next weekend. Right, everyone's so excited." I paused, confused. "What dinner?" I asked. The silence that followed lasted half a second too long. "Oh," she said, her voice faltering. "I thought your parents told you. Maybe it slipped their minds." It hadn't. Of course it hadn't. I called my mother right after. She didn't even bother pretending. "Well," she sighed, "we figured you'd be too busy with Lily. Besides, it's Derek's night. We didn't want to make things complicated." Complicated. That word stuck in my throat like gravel. I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, I stared at the photo Martha sent me, Derek beaming in a tailored navy suit, flanked by my parents, aunt, cousins, everyone but me, everyone but Lily. My daughter didn't just lose a seat at the table, she was erased from it entirely. I didn't cry that night. I didn't rage. Instead, I sat at the kitchen counter while Lily drew dinosaurs on construction paper and asked why Grandma never visits. I said something vague, something neutral, and told her she was my favorite person in the world. She smiled, completely unaware of the weight her little joy carried. That was when I knew I had to do something not just for me, but for her. Because if I didn't break the cycle, Lily would grow up believing she had to beg for space in rooms she already belonged in. Over the next week, something began to grow in me. Not revenge exactly, but clarity. Sharp, focused, unforgiving clarity. I stopped making excuses for my parents, stopped believing I owed them softness they never earned. I remembered the birthdays they forgot, the school plays they missed, the way my dad once asked me, "Why don't you smile more the day after Jason left?" And suddenly, it all aligned. The years of erasure weren't accidental. I wasn't forgotten. I was ignored on purpose. Because I made it easier for them to focus on Derek. Because I didn't demand space. But I would now. I would demand it, take it, hold it with both hands, and never let it be taken from me again. I wouldn't beg them to show up at my upcoming promotion ceremony. I wouldn't remind them that Lily was winning a statewide art competition next month. I wouldn't fight to be invited to a table that never wanted me there. No, I'd build my own table. One with room for people who saw me, heard me, chose me without being told. I just didn't know yet that the road to that table would begin with a single event, an event that looked ordinary from the outside, but would split my family wide open. It began with a reunion, a casual weekend retreat at our family's lakehouse in Michigan. Something we used to do when Derek and I were kids. I wasn't going to go at first. I told myself I didn't have the emotional bandwidth, didn't need the stress. But then Lily found the old photo albums from past trips and asked if she could go to the lake just once, like when Mommy was little. And just like that, my resolve cracked. I said yes. Not for my family, for Lily. Because every child deserves to believe, at least for a little while, that families can be good. We arrived Friday afternoon. The house was exactly as I remembered: creaky floors, the scent of pine and old wood, the lake view that made you forget, briefly, how messy the people inside could be. Derek was already there, of course, standing by the grill, beer in hand, laughing with our uncle about some client he'd tricked into overpaying. He looked at me like I was a curiosity that had wandered in from the wrong movie. "Wow," he said. "You actually showed up." My mother's voice followed, sharp and practiced Audrey. "Maybe don't let Lily touch anything yet, she's tracking dirt inside." I ignored it, sat with Lily, helped her unpack her sketchbook, watched her draw the lake with fat blue markers and label it magic water. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this trip wouldn't hurt. But pain has a way of creeping in where you least expect. And that night, over dinner, it finally snapped. Lily offered to sing a song she learned in music class. She stood up, her voice clear and high and so full of joy. And halfway through, Derek interrupted her with a mocking laugh. "Jesus, is she always this loud?" Lily flinched. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Derek, my brother, my family, leaned in and said, "Maybe someone should teach her how to behave." Then he reached out and flicked her on the forehead. Not hard, but not gently, either. I stood. The room went quiet. My dad said, "Oh, come on, Audrey. Don't make a scene," my mom muttered. "She's too sensitive, like always." I looked at them, all of them, the people who raised me, the ones who taught me that silence was the price of acceptance, and for the first time, I felt nothing for them, nothing but cold, measured distance. But someone else stood up that night, too, my uncle's husband, Paul, a filmmaker, quiet, observant, always with a camera nearby. He didn't speak. He just looked at me and said, "Audrey, that was all recorded." And that was the moment everything changed. Because when the world refuses to see you, sometimes the only way forward is to make them look whether they want to or not. Paul's words didn't register at first. I thought I'd misheard. That maybe he meant it figuratively, like that moment is etched in memory. Not literally recorded. But then he clarified, calmly, evenly, like someone who was used to observing ugliness behind a lens. I had the camera running all through dinner. I've been documenting family gatherings for a project. His eyes flicked toward Lily, then back to me, and I think people need to see this. The table fell into a weird silence. My father scoffed. Derek rolled his eyes. And my mother had the audacity to laugh tight and high-pitched. "Paul, darling, no one's going to watch a home video of Lily being dramatic. She wasn't hurt. Audrey always makes things bigger than they are." I said nothing, just gathered Lily and went to our room. My hands were trembling as I zipped her pajamas and tucked her into bed. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She just turned away and stared at the wall. And I could feel the part of her childhood that broke a little tonight. I sat there for a long time, listening to the murmur of voices downstairs. It was the same script as always: dismissal, blame, deflection. But this time, I had proof. The next morning, Paul knocked gently at our door. He handed me a USB drive and said, "It's all there. You can use it however you see fit." And then he left, without another word, like he knew this wasn't his story to tell. I didn't watch the footage until we got home. I waited until Lily was asleep, until the dishes were done, until I had run out of excuses. Then I plugged the drive into my laptop and pressed play. It was worse than I remembered. You could see everything the way Derek's tone shifted, the subtle cruelty in his voice, the dismissiveness from my parents. You could see Lily, bright-eyed and brave, shrinking mid-note. You could hear the flick a small sound, but it echoed. And then you could see me, frozen for a moment too long, before standing up with fire in my eyes. The look on my father's face when I did was revealing, like he was surprised I still had the ability to rise. I rewatched the video twice, once with the eyes of a mother, once with the eyes of a woman finally done being silent. Then I sat in the dark and thought, what now? I didn't want revenge, not in the cartoon sense. I didn't want screaming matches or public humiliation. What I wanted was acknowledgement, accountability. I wanted them to know they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross, that they had wounded something sacred, and that there would be no quiet slipping back into old patterns. I wanted change, or I wanted distance, but I would no longer accept the hollow middle ground of endurance. That week, I consulted with a friend, Janelle, who worked in communications and had helped nonprofits go viral with real stories. She wasn't just strategic, she was ruthless in the most elegant way. After watching the footage, she sat back and said, "This isn't just about you. This is about every person who's been gaslit by their own family." We crafted a plan. I wrote an essay, part confession, part narrative, part open letter. It detailed not just what happened at the lakehouse, but years of patterns, the erased milestones, the weaponized silence, the denial of even the most basic emotional dignity. I changed names, blurred faces in the video. But the story was raw, detailed, and emotionally precise. We titled it "The Cost of Being the Invisible Daughter." Janelle pitched it to several platforms. Within 3 days, it was accepted by a major women's publication. Within another 2, the video had been embedded at the end of the essay. Within a week, it had 2 million views. And then the calls started. First, my mother. Her voicemail was frantic. "Audrey, how could you? People at the club are asking questions. Your father is beside himself." Then Derek texted, "You're a drama queen. You always have been. Hope the attention's worth it." And finally, my dad, who never texted, sent a 3-word message, "This is war." But what they didn't realize was that they were already losing, because for once, people were seeing them clearly. Their words, their tone, their neglect, it was all laid bare. And the response wasn't sympathy for them. It was outrage. My inbox filled with messages from strangers, from daughters and sons who had lived similar stories, people who'd been the emotional second choice their whole lives, people who said, "I never had proof until now. Thank you." Meanwhile, Lily's school counselor called me in. She'd read the piece. She wanted to offer support. "You're not alone," she said. "We've seen how generational patterns impact children. Lily's brave. You're brave." I broke down crying in that office, not out of sadness, but from the strange relief of being believed. But the ripple effect hadn't stopped. A week later, I received an email from a media company that had been following the story. They wanted me to appear on a panel about family estrangement and emotional boundaries. I almost said no until I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't trying to be palatable, so I said yes. The panel was small, intimate, but powerful. I sat beside a therapist, a family law expert, and a woman who had survived years of parental neglect. I told my story not as a victim, but as someone reclaiming her narrative. And when the moderator asked, "What changed?" I said, "My daughter looked up at me with fear after a man hurt her, and I realized I'd seen that same fear in my own reflection for too long." The audience was silent. Then someone clapped. Then more. I didn't expect what came next. That night, the panel was clipped, edited, and reshared on social media. A 4-minute excerpt of me speaking my truth hit 4.2 million views in 3 days. People stitched it, duetted it, shared it with captions like "finally." Someone said it, and to every oldest daughter who had to parent herself, "This is for you." My family, predictably, spiraled. My father called and left a voice message that sounded more like a deposition than a heartfelt plea. "We didn't raise you to be vindictive. You're tearing this family apart." My mother emailed me an 800-word essay of her own, filled with pseudo-apologies like, "If we made you feel ignored, that was never our intent, Derek." He went quiet for now. But someone else reached out too, someone I hadn't expected. My cousin Miles, always a background figure in family events, messaged me late at night. "Audrey, I saw what you posted. I remember things. From when we were kids. You weren't imagining it. I always thought it was just the way things were. I'm sorry I never said anything." He didn't have to. His message alone validated something I had carried for years. That week, Lily and I baked cookies and brought them to the neighbors. We decorated our apartment with secondhand string lights and paper stars. We weren't celebrating the drama. We were celebrating freedom, the quiet, unglamorous kind that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't done, because even though my voice was finally being heard, there were parts of the past deep, systemic, financial parts that were beginning to surface. What I didn't know yet was that Derek had been granted power of attorney over our grandfather's trust, that my parents were quietly transferring legal influence and property into his name, that I was being erased. Again, this time not from dinner tables or photo albums, but from inheritance documents, permanently, legally. And this time, I wasn't going to wait until the damage was done. Because I had learned something essential over the past month. Silence is not grace. Endurance is not loyalty. And some battles, once made visible, demand to be fought until the very end. The email came in on a Tuesday morning. I almost deleted it, thinking it was another PR request or podcast invite. But the subject line stopped me cold, concerning grandfather's trust. It was from Aunt Rebecca, my mother's older sister, a woman I barely spoke to and who had always seemed comfortably distant from family drama. The message was short, almost too calm for what it contained. "Audrey, I thought you should know there are discussions happening about the family trust, your grandfather's estate. Your name has not been mentioned. I'm not sure how far it's gone, but Derek has been involved in meetings. I assumed you were part of this. You should be." I sat there staring at the screen, coffee growing cold in my hands, Lily humming quietly in the background as she worked on a school project. I reread the email 5 times, and each time it hit harder. My grandfather had passed away when I was 16. I remembered him as a kind man with quiet wisdom, the only adult who ever seemed to look at me like I mattered. He used to say things like, "You don't have to be loud to be unforgettable." He believed in balance, fairness. So the idea that something he had left behind something meant for both his grandchildren was now being carved up in backroom meetings without my knowledge or consent made my skin crawl. I called Aunt Rebecca immediately. Her voice was firm, clipped with restraint, but not cold. "Audrey, your father and uncle have been talking about liquidating a property that was part of the trust. The land near the lakehouse, but in the draft paperwork. The only name listed for transfer is Derek's, not yours. They've already brought in a financial planner. I overheard part of the conversation at the last family dinner. They weren't exactly whispering. My mouth was dry. How long have they been planning this? I don't know, she said honestly, but long enough that things are moving. There was a pause. I'm telling you because you have a right to know, and because your grandfather wouldn't have wanted this. After the call ended, I went into what I now recognize as survival mode. I didn't cry. I didn't call my mother to scream or beg for answers. I didn't even tell Lily. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and searched for estate attorneys. I scheduled 3 consultations that same day. By the end of the week, I had hired a lawyer named Diane Halpern Sharp, experienced and wonderfully intolerant of family manipulation. She looked through the trust documents I managed to obtain with Rebecca's help, eyes narrowing as she read. This clause here, she pointed, clearly outlined shared inheritance between grandchildren, equal shares, unless otherwise contested with cause. But here she flipped to a newer amendment is where it gets interesting. Someone tried to rewrite this section, listing Derek as the sole inheritor of the lakeside property, citing a provision about primary familial contribution. It's legally shaky, but not impossible to push through if no one challenges it. And no one has, I said bitterly, because I didn't even know it existed. Until now, she replied. But now you do, and we can challenge it. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, notarized letters, document retrieval, and late-night strategy calls. Diane was relentless, but so was I. I'd spent my life staying quiet while my family dismissed me. I wasn't going to let them erase me from a legacy that was meant to be mine and Lily's by blood and right. This wasn't just about money. It was about history, memory, truth. It was about telling my daughter that when people try to take what belongs to you, you don't shrink, you rise. And then, predictably, the retaliation came. First, there was silence, a vacuum of communication from my parents, Derek, and anyone connected to them. Then came the texts, sharper, colder. My mother said, "Audrey, this is unnecessary. We never intended to exclude you. You're being dramatic again." My father followed with, "This is a legal nightmare. Do you really want to drag the family name through this?" But the most telling message came from Derek. "This is petty. You had your little viral moment. Don't ruin our family's future over some piece of land you barely care about." It was almost laughable, the way they thought this was about ego, about attention, as if being publicly humiliated was something I enjoyed, as if I hadn't spent years burying myself to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation. But now I didn't care about their discomfort. If anything, I welcomed it. Because discomfort is where change begins. A few days later, Diane submitted an official petition to halt any movement on the trust, citing questionable amendments and lack of proper beneficiary notification. We demanded a full audit. That move triggered an automatic freeze on any transfer activity, which meant Derek couldn't claim ownership without a legal battle, and suddenly, the silence cracked. My mother showed up at my door one evening, unannounced, face tight with forced concern. "Can we talk?" she asked, as if that was a reasonable question after months of lies. I let her in, mostly for Lily's sake. She sat on my couch, glanced at the apartment like she was cataloging every choice I'd made in life, then launched into her monologue. "We never wanted to hurt you, Audrey. You've always been so independent. You didn't need as much from us." I looked at her for a long time before speaking. "That's not love, Mom. That's abandonment disguised as respect." She flinched, but said nothing. "I'm not doing this because I need your money," I continued. "I'm doing this because you tried to pretend I didn't exist, and you almost got away with it." That shut her down. She left soon after, but not before saying, This will change everything. I nodded. That's the point. But the most unexpected moment came from Lily. Just a few days later, she was sitting at the table drawing, as usual, when she looked up and asked, "Are you fighting with Grandpa and Grandma?" I hesitated, sort of. Why? Because they forgot something important, I said carefully. And when people forget something that matters to you, sometimes you have to remind them, even if they don't like it. She nodded, then held up her drawing. It was of the lakehouse, but this time, instead of just the building, she'd drawn herself and me standing in front of it, holding hands. She'd written ours in big block letters across the top. I stared at it, and something in me cracked wide open, not from pain, but from clarity. This was the legacy I was fighting for. Not property, not paperwork, but memory, belonging, proof that we were here, that we mattered, that we had the right to exist loudly, fully, without apology. And even though the legal battle was far from over, I knew then that I'd already won something deeper. I'd broken the cycle. But just when I thought the worst had passed, a letter arrived that would push everything to the next level. It wasn't from a lawyer or family member, it was from my grandfather's former accountant. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "Thought you might want to see this. It was mailed to us years ago, never processed, but it's yours." Attached was a copy of a signed letter from my grandfather, one I had never seen, dated 3 months before his death. In it, he wrote clearly, in the event of my passing, "The lake property is to be shared equally between my grandchildren, Audrey and Derek. I trust both will honor its legacy." And at the bottom was a postscript. "Audrey, this place was always your sanctuary. I hope it continues to be." I held that letter for a long time, barely breathing, because with it came not just legal leverage, but something far more powerful: validation, a voice from the past, speaking truth into a present full of noise, a message meant for me, hidden by those who feared it, and now, finally, it was mine. And I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The original letter changed everything. It wasn't just a document, it was a resurrection, proof that I had not been imagining the imbalance, the erasure, the manipulation for the first time. My fight had irrefutable weight. I forwarded it to Diane, who called me 10 minutes later, practically buzzing. "This is a game changer," she said. "It's handwritten, dated, and signed. It confirms everything we've been arguing. We can now formally challenge the amendment and move for full beneficiary recognition." And that's exactly what we did. The new filing included a scanned copy of the letter and a notarized affidavit from the accountant confirming its authenticity and postmark date. It forced the court to freeze all actions regarding the trust until a formal hearing could be scheduled. Suddenly, my parents couldn't move forward with their development plans, and Derek couldn't move money or make decisions. We had leverage, and I wasn't afraid to use it, not for retaliation, but for truth, for fairness, for the legacy that had almost been stolen in silence. Then, something unexpected happened. The story broke outside of court. It began with a blog post. A former college classmate of mine who ran a popular site about estate and family justice wrote a piece titled "Erased by Bloodline: One Woman's Battle to Be Seen." I hadn't given an interview. I hadn't planned for any of it to go public. But she pieced the story together from social media, public filings, and the alumni presentation I had given months before. I was shocked, but also strangely calm, because once something that heavy breaks the surface, it can't be buried again. The blog post went viral. Within days, people across the country were emailing me, strangers, other firstborn daughters, estranged siblings, women who'd been written out of wills, Children who had been told they were too independent to need love. The response was overwhelming and validating. I wasn't alone. This wasn't just my story. It was a reflection of a deeper sickness. In so many families, the way quiet strength is mistaken for insignificance. How emotional labor is invisible until someone refuses to carry it anymore. The attention made my family furious. My mother left a voicemail. "You're humiliating us. You've made us look like villains to the world." My father followed with an email that read, more like a cease and desist. "You're pushing this too far. This is still a private matter." And then Derek, who hadn't spoken to me directly in weeks, finally reached out in a text that was part apology, part warning. "This isn't just about you anymore. Audrey, people are watching. If this gets worse, it'll hurt all of us, including Lily." That last part, that mention of my daughter, burned deeper than anything else. I typed and deleted 5 different responses before settling on the one that said everything I needed it to. "Then maybe you should have thought of that before trying to erase us." I didn't hear back after that. The media attention created another effect. I hadn't anticipated pressure on the university. My alma mater had invited me back for another event, a panel about generational change and advocacy in design. During the pre-interview call, the moderator said gently, "Audrey, you're becoming something bigger than this case. People are listening to you. You're saying what others have been too afraid to say." And I realized she was right. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was leading. So I leaned in. I gave the interview. I spoke clearly, not with venom, but with precision. I talked about what it meant to grow up invisible, to be punished for resilience, to have your story reshaped by the louder voices around you. I spoke about Lily, about how I refused to let my daughter inherit silence. And I ended with this: "Sometimes the most radical act of love is refusing to disappear." That line echoed across the internet. By the time the court hearing came, public sentiment was so clearly in my favor that even my parents' legal team adopted a gentler tone. They tried to downplay the oversight, suggesting it was a clerical error or a misunderstanding between generations. But the judge didn't buy it. Neither did Diane. We had the letter. We had years of paper trails, texts, emails, financial contributions I had made to the upkeep of the lake property that no one had acknowledged. We had witnesses. Paul, my uncle's husband, came forward with videos showing years of imbalance and exclusion during family events. Even Aunt Rebecca testified. She looked directly at the judge and said, "Audrey has always been treated as less. It was never subtle." In the end, the court ruled in my favor. The trust was formally corrected. I was reinstated as a full co-beneficiary, and Derek's claim to sole inheritance was declared invalid. But more than that, the court acknowledged the attempt to quietly overwrite my role as unlawful and potentially malicious. That word malicious hung in the air like smoke. It didn't bring me joy, but it did bring something close to peace, because it meant someone had finally seen it all for what it was. After the ruling, there was a strange quiet. My family didn't call, didn't email. Derek went off the grid for a while, no social posts, no public statements. My mother sent a short handwritten letter, saying, "We didn't know how to love you. I'm sorry it took the law to teach us how." I didn't respond. Not because I hated her, but because forgiveness, like trust, can't be rushed. It has to be rebuilt brick by brick. And I wasn't ready to start laying bricks just yet. Instead, I turned inward, focused on Lily, on our routines, our laughter, our Saturday pancakes. I started a foundation named after my grandfather, dedicated to supporting young women in design and media who come from emotionally neglectful families. We gave out 5 microgrants in our first quarter. The applications broke my heart and stitched it back together. So many stories like mine, so many voices waiting to be heard. One afternoon, as I was walking Lily home from school, she stopped and tugged my hand. "Mom," she said, "are we okay now?" I crouched to her level. "What do you mean?" "With the family. Are we safe now?" I blinked, throat tightening. She hadn't said happy. She hadn't said forgiven. She'd said safe. Because even at her age, she'd felt the rupture. She'd sensed what I tried so hard to shield her from. "Yes," I said softly. "We're safe now." She nodded, then skipped ahead to chase a butterfly. Later that night, I sat on the porch of the lakehouse, my half, now legally mine, and watched the sunset blaze across the water. It looked the same as it had when I was a child, but everything had changed. I had changed. Not into someone new, but finally into myself. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. Because sometimes, the greatest act of revenge is becoming undeniable. Story 2. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28, and for most of my life, I've played the role of the family oddball, the one everyone loved just enough to keep around for holidays, but not enough to actually understand. Not the rebel, not the failure, just the invisible one. While my cousins and siblings racked up socially acceptable milestones, weddings with custom monograms, job promotions with LinkedIn posts that got 300 likes, my victories were quieter. I was the one who traveled, started weird businesses abroad, spoke 3 languages, but somehow always got introduced as the artsy one who hasn't quite figured things out. To them, my choices weren't success, they were evidence of avoidance. My parents, Charles and Linda, were the textbook definition of suburban pride, buttoned up, polite, invested heavily in image. They didn't scream or shame, not outright. They laughed, quiet jabs at Thanksgiving, wistful sighs when my younger sister Samantha hit milestones I'd long since passed in other forms. And their favorite running joke, my imaginary fiancé. They started it last Christmas when I didn't bring anyone home. My dad clinked his wine glass and toasted to whoever Emily's dating in her mind, and the whole room roared. I remember sitting there, heat creeping up my neck, smiling politely as if I was in on the bit. I wasn't. What they didn't know was I wasn't single. I'd met Daniel just a few months earlier while consulting in Dubai. He wasn't just a guy I was seeing, he was someone I saw a future with. Brilliant, grounded, hilariously sharp, and terrifyingly kind, but after years of being overlooked. I'd learned not to introduce anything good until I knew it was strong enough to endure the storm. So when my cousin Rachel's engagement party rolled around an affair with a guest list longer than most small weddings, I debated staying home. But something inside me shifted. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted to stop hiding. Maybe I just wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized the daughter they'd underestimated was playing a game entirely above their league. Daniel was flying in that same morning, and because of weather and timing, I arrived first alone. Mistake number 1. I barely got a drink before my mom appeared at my elbow. Lips already pursed. "No +1, she asked. Voice drenched in faux concern. My dad, standing nearby, didn't even wait for my answer before chuckling. She brought the invisible man again. Then came Uncle Tom, raising a glass to Emily's unicorn boyfriend, prompting laughter from people who still thought sarcasm counted as personality. I didn't flinch. I smiled, because I knew what was coming. As the party settled under the white linen tent, speeches began. Rachel's dad, then Rachel and her fiancé Mark, both gushing with predictable sweetness. I zoned out, watching the soft flicker of fairy lights, sipping champagne with steady hands. And then, because of course it was her, my mom stood, raising her glass. "Here's to Rachel and Mark, and here's to Emily," she said sweetly. May she one day find a love that's just as real. The laughter wasn't cruel exactly. It was the kind that comes when people have grown too comfortable being careless. They didn't think I'd ever be more than a punchline. But then, we all heard it. A low thump, thump, thump. Rhythmic and rising. Heads turned. Glasses paused midair. Through the canopy of oaks behind the tent, a sleek black helicopter emerged, slicing through the Texas heat like a scene from a movie. It circled once and began its descent toward the clearing just past the party grounds. And I didn't even need to look. I just smiled, finished my drink, and waited. Because now, everything was about to change. The helicopter blades slowed into a hum as it touched down on the freshly manicured lawn just beyond the party tent. By then, every guest had stopped pretending to care about Rachel's engagement. All eyes craned toward the clearing. Phones slipped out of pockets like a collective reflex. I could hear whispers ripple around me. Is this part of the event? Is someone famous arriving? Did they hire a helicopter just for the drama? I didn't say a word. I just adjusted my clutch and straightened the hem of my dress, my heart steady but my mouth betraying a small, very earned smirk. Then the tent flaps parted, and there he was, Daniel. His suit looked like it was stitched directly onto him. Charcoal gray with a barely visible sheen under the golden hour light. No tie, just a crisp white shirt, 2 buttons undone. Confidence oozing without arrogance. His sunglasses were in his hand, not on his face, because of course he knew better than to hide his eyes in a moment like this. He walked up the aisle between the tables like it was a runway, smiling with amused confusion at the sudden hush. And then, just as he reached me, he leaned in, kissed my cheek, and with perfect timing, said, "Sorry I'm late. Love. Traffic from Dubai was murder. Had to park the helicopter." Boom! You could have heard a diamond earring drop. Behind me, I could feel my mother's jaw tightening so hard, her temples probably ached. My father made a small choking noise that sounded like someone rebooting mid-system error. Rachel's fiancé, God bless him, broke the spell with a low whistle and a loud, "That's the sickest entrance I've ever seen," and clapped Daniel on the back like they were old college friends. Daniel chuckled, completely unaware he'd just shattered years of unspoken hierarchy in one entrance. I took his arm, gently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Daniel, these are my parents," I said, turning to face the statues formerly known as Charles and Linda. "Mom. Dad, this is my fiancé." Silence. My mom blinked rapidly, trying to resuscitate her smile. My dad's hand twitched like he was unsure whether to extend it or pretend this wasn't happening. "Daniel, ever the diplomat, reached out anyway. It's a pleasure, sir. Emily's told me a lot about you both." That was a lie. I'd told him almost nothing. Not because I was hiding them, but because I didn't want to waste time preparing him for the kind of subtle cruelty they called love. My dad shook his hand. Robotic. My mom let out a noise that might have been a laugh or a gasp. And then, because she couldn't help herself, she tried to recover the upper hand. "Well, Emily never mentioned you were so successful." Daniel didn't flinch. He smiled, slow and warm. "She's modest, probably because she's just as successful. I'm lucky she agreed to co-own the Dubai property with me. I needed someone smarter than me to manage it." There was an actual, audible gasp. My mother's champagne glass tilted slightly. My father turned a shade paler. My cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. And just like that, everything they thought they knew about me started to unravel. But we weren't done yet. Not even close. As the shock wore off, you could practically hear the gears grinding in people's heads, recalibrating everything they thought they knew about me. My mother's lips were parted, blinking like someone who'd just witnessed a glitch in her suburban matrix. She opened her mouth, closed it, then managed a wobbly. "That's wonderful, dear." You could feel the discomfort behind every syllable, like she was being forced to swallow a jagged pill coated in Chanel perfume. Meanwhile, Daniel turned to one of my aunts who had drifted over like a gossip moth to a scandalous flame. "It's lovely to finally meet everyone. I've heard such great things," he said smoothly, even though we both knew the only thing he'd heard were horror stories I shared on late nights with wine and laughter. She asked him what he did, and, with the kind of casual ease that only someone completely secure in their identity could pull off, he replied, "Private equity. I specialize in international startup acquisitions." Her eyes widened so fast, I was concerned for her lashes. "We just wrapped a project in Dubai, actually. That's why I was running behind." From that moment, it was a feeding frenzy. More relatives crept in, abandoning cocktail shrimp for a piece of the mystery fiancé action. Suddenly, I wasn't Emily the underachiever, the girl who never settled down. I was Emily the international businesswoman with the dashing helicopter-riding fiancé. The same people who used to half-joke that I should get serious were now peppering me with fake interested questions about how I got into consulting, whether Daniel had any investor contacts, and if I had any advice for moving abroad. But not everyone adjusted so easily. My mom, trying desperately to keep her footing, tossed out. "We always knew Emily had potential. She just needed the right structure." Translation: someone else to make her finally respectable. That's when Daniel struck gold again, he said, not missing a beat. "Funny. I always thought Emily had too much brilliance to be boxed into someone else's idea of success." Then he sipped his champagne like it was water, and watched as my mother tried to both smile and swallow her pride at the same time. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. My silence was loud enough, my arm linked in his. I simply existed fully seen, finally undeniable. Still, the real punch hadn't landed yet. Later that night, after most guests had slipped into slightly tipsy territory and the music was thumping at a safer distance, I noticed my dad pull Daniel aside under the pretense of just wanting a word. I didn't follow, but I didn't need to. I wandered near enough to hear, pretending to check my phone. Dad said something low and awkward, something like, "You know, Emily's always been a bit unconventional. Hope you're prepared for that." That subtle parental undermining masked as concern. Daniel, cool as a winter moon, answered without hesitation, "Yes, sir, I know exactly what I'm getting into. She's the smartest, kindest, and most underestimated woman I've ever met. I only hope I live up to her." Then he clapped my dad gently on the shoulder and walked back to me like he hadn't just thrown a Molotov cocktail of truth into the echo chamber that raised me. We didn't linger much longer after that. As we lifted off in the helicopter, city lights glittering beneath us, the thrum of blades like the beating of long-silenced wings, I stared down at the sprawling suburb I used to call home, the part of me that always felt small, dismissed, overlooked. It didn't just feel seen that night. It felt avenged, and still. There was one final ripple yet to come. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of notifications texts, missed calls, and a family group chat that had clearly imploded overnight. At first, the messages seemed innocuous. "Great party last night. Congrats again, Rachel and Mark." But then Aunt Linda, ever the conversation detonator, posted, "Wait, was it true what I heard Emily's fiancé owns property in Dubai?" The chat froze for about a full minute. Then, like someone had lit a match in a room filled with gas, it exploded. Uncle Greg chimed in, "LOL, did anyone else think he was a hired actor for a second? I mean, come on," helicopter cousin Ashley added. "I thought it was part of the party, like a performance." My mom, clearly trying to regain control, wrote, "He's very impressive. We just wish Emily had told us earlier. We were just surprised. Surprised. That was the word she kept using. Not happy, not proud, not congrats. Just surprised. Like I had pulled off a trick. A temporary illusion that was too clean. Too polished to be real. It was almost funny. If it hadn't hurt so much. Hours passed before she texted me privately. We need to talk. Your father and I are concerned about how serious this is. Concerned. That word again. Not joyful. Not excited, concerned. I ignored the message for a few hours. Let it simmer. Eventually she called. And when I picked up, she tried to spin the whole conversation as if it had come from a place of love. We just wish you'd told us sooner. Honey, you have to understand Daniel's, well, men in private equity aren't always stable, and jumping into co-owning a property, that's a lot. Like she'd Googled private equity risks and decided to play financial advisor to save face. I kept my voice steady. We're fine. Mom, we know what we're doing. The line went quiet. I could hear her frustration pulsing through the silence, like a signal trying to reconnect with an outdated network. Eventually, she muttered something about just wanting the best for me and ended the call. What followed over the next week was an Olympic-level display of backpedaling and revisionist history. Suddenly, my parents were telling anyone who'd listen that they'd always believed in me, that they knew I had a plan all along, that Daniel was exactly the kind of man Emily deserved. It was like watching them rewrite their narrative in real time, scrubbing the years of passive-aggressive jabs, condescension, and open mockery into a spotless fairy tale where they'd been my #1 fans. But the best part, the absolute pièce de résistance, came in the form of a message from Rachel, the cousin whose engagement party we had just upstaged. Rachel wrote, "So, we're thinking of pushing the wedding back a few months." I blinked, then kept reading. Mark's parents weren't thrilled with how our side of the family behaved. They thought the jokes, the drama, the helicopter thing, it made the party feel less classy. They're asking us to reconsider the guest list, maybe downscale the whole thing. In short, the fallout of that single entrance had rippled so far, it now threatened to derail Rachel's picture-perfect wedding timeline. She wasn't mad at me. Surprisingly, if anything, she was pissed at the family at large for not knowing how to act. And me, I just kept sipping my coffee, smiling to myself. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud or vengeful. Sometimes it's quiet, effortless. It's living exactly the life they said you never could, while they scramble to pretend they were always on your side. But even that, satisfying as it was, wasn't the end of it. One final move remained, and I intended to make it count. A week later, Daniel and I boarded a quiet flight out of New York, destination Switzerland. No fanfare, no farewell dinner, no family updates. Just us, 2 rings in my purse, and a quiet civil ceremony waiting at a lakeside town we had both fallen in love with months ago. The ceremony itself was simple, just a justice of the peace. 2 witnesses we'd met earlier that morning, and a soft breeze that made my veil flutter like a secret. There was no dramatic music, no teary-eyed relatives watching, and yet, it was the most grounded I had ever felt in my entire life. Afterward, as we shared a glass of wine at a tucked-away vineyard, Daniel looked at me and said, "You know, I didn't fall for you because you were trying to impress anyone. I fell because you weren't." That was the real flex. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made the past ache a little less. Back home, the story of our quiet elopement trickled through the family like a leak no one could plug. I didn't post about it. I didn't even send a group message. But somehow, within 48 hours, I got a text from Aunt Linda that simply read, "Congrats. Heard through the grapevine. Stunning location," which roughly translated to, "We've all been talking about it behind your back, and now we need to save face." Meanwhile, my parents, They spun a new narrative almost instantly. Suddenly, I was their independent daughter, their free spirit who never did things the conventional way. They told neighbors I had always been destined to chart her own path, if you heard them tell it. They practically raised me on feminist philosophy and encouraged me to challenge the status quo. Never mind the years of awkward dinner interventions and blind dates with accountants named Greg. The most poetic twist, though, came from the least expected person, my younger brother, Nate. For years, Nate had been the good one, stable, predictable, never controversial. But after the engagement party, something cracked. He called me a few days after our return and said, I just want to say I saw the way they treated you for years. I didn't step in because I thought keeping the peace was more important, but watching you finally shut them all up, it made me realize silence isn't neutral. It's just easier." He paused, then added, "I'm proud of you. Always have been. Just took me too long to say it." It was, in many ways, the only real apology I'd ever gotten from anyone in my family, and it wasn't even from the people who owed me the most. Meanwhile, Daniel and I got back to work. We expanded the consulting arm of our business into Southeast Asia, launched a startup incubator for women entrepreneurs, and spent our weekends somewhere between airports and open-air markets. Life wasn't always smooth, but it was ours, completely and unapologetically. No permission asked, no validation needed. The people who used to roll their eyes at my dreams now emailed asking for advice. The same relatives who mocked me behind my back now asked if their daughters could intern for my company. And my parents, well, they still tried to rewrite history every time we met. But now, I just let them talk. I had stopped trying to win their approval the moment Daniel stepped out of that helicopter. And that's the funny thing about family, their memory is short. But your scars last longer, so you either carry them in silence, or you turn them into something solid. For me, it was dignity. For them, it was the uncomfortable realization that they could no longer pretend I was the punchline to their dinner jokes. In the end, I didn't need to scream or fight. I didn't need to defend my choices or prove anything. I just needed to live well, love honestly, and let the silence that followed speak volumes. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't noise, it's success quiet, undeniable, and completely on your own terms. And with that final chapter closed, I stepped fully into the life they never thought I could build, and never looked back. Story 3. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 28, and for the past year, I've been living like a ghost of myself, 2 jobs, endless side hustles, ramen noodles for dinner, and bags under my eyes that could carry groceries, all for one reason: my son Tyler. He's 7, sweet as cinnamon toast, and was born with a congenital defect that's been manageable until recently. But a few months ago, things took a turn. He started having sharp pains in his chest, couldn't run like other kids, and his breathing became shallow. The doctor said surgery wasn't optional anymore. Insurance, in all its broken glory, agreed to cover some of it, but not enough. We needed $9,400 upfront to secure the date. I opened a separate savings account and poured every dime into it. No vacations, no nights out, no Starbucks, just survival and love. Then Amanda came around. She's my cousin, 3 years older, and has always been the family's chaotic hurricane, glittery on the outside, messy underneath, Gucci bags one day, eviction notices the next. We'd grown up close, almost like sisters. But adulthood turned her selfishness into a kind of lifestyle aesthetic, manifestation over discipline. She once posted on her Instagram under a picture of her with a cocktail in Cabo. Still, when she started dropping by with baked goods and asking about Tyler, I let my guard down. She talked about how proud she was of me, how family should always stick together. It felt nice to be seen, even if only for a moment. But I should have remembered Amanda only watches you to learn your weaknesses. About a week later, I came home from a brutal 12-hour double shift. The house looked normal until I noticed my bedroom door slightly open. My blood ran cold. My hands were trembling before I even touched the drawer. The folder with Tyler's surgery savings, passwords, printed statements, it was gone. I tore through everything. My laptop was still there. But when I logged in to check the account, 0.47, every cent gone. My stomach flipped. I called the bank, crying so hard the agent could barely understand me. They launched a fraud report, but because it came from my usual IP address and used my saved credentials, they said there wasn't much to be done immediately. That's when I remembered 3 days ago. Amanda had been sitting beside me while I paid for Tyler's asthma medication online. She joked, "Hope no hackers are watching you." I brushed it off at the time. Now I wanted to scream. I called, voicemail, texted, nothing. Then, the next morning, a text pinged through. It was a selfie Amanda at the airport, holding a glass of champagne, captioned, "Off to Paris." "Baby, work hard, play harder." I saw red. I sent a storm of messages pleading, threatening, sobbing into my phone, and all she replied was, "Chill, Tyler will be fine, kids bounce back, you're so dramatic." That line broke me in a way nothing else had. Tyler had been waking up in the middle of the night crying. His tiny body curled into mine like he was trying to shrink from the pain. I'd been scraping my soul raw just to afford one shot at fixing him, and she called me dramatic. I went to the police, to the bank again, even consulted an attorney. But everything felt slow, gray, hopeless. I had to cancel Tyler's surgery appointment. And explaining that to him, watching confusion bloom in his eyes when I told him we had to wait, was the hardest moment of my life. But rock bottom has a way of turning into solid ground, if you dig deep enough, because just when I thought Amanda had won, karma decided it was time to stir, and I was about to make sure she tasted every last spoonful of what she served, while Amanda was sipping mimosas at Charles de Gaulle. I was unraveling, quietly, but with purpose. I'd stopped crying. Something inside me had clicked into place, cold, focused, and furious. First, I called my lawyer again. This time, we reviewed every transaction I had tied to that savings account, every digital breadcrumb Amanda left. Turns out, she hadn't been as clever as she thought, even though she accessed my account from my home IP. The purchases she made, like that Paris flight and the luxury hotel reservation, were done using her own email and travel account. And when the travel agency confirmed she booked under her name with my stolen funds, that crossed into actionable territory: fraud, theft, and, even better, interstate and international transaction flags. Now here's where things started to shift in my favor. What Amanda didn't realize, despite her online influencer posturing, is that tagging yourself on Instagram can be a double-edged sword. She'd been bragging non-stop about 5-star living, but eagle-eyed followers and a few internet sleuth friends of mine noticed something wasn't adding up. The hotel was actually a glorified youth hostel, complete with shared bathrooms and bunk beds. One of her photos from lunch at the Eiffel Tower was clearly taken blocks away from the real location, at a tourist trap cafe next to a subway stop. And then came the moment I knew karma was officially working overtime. Her passport got stolen. According to a mutual friend who saw her panic post in a Facebook group, Amanda had her bag snatched while taking a selfie near the Seine. Inside were her ID, phone charger, and what was left of the cash she hadn't already blown. Suddenly, Paris was no longer romantic. She was stranded. No documents, no money, no way to even contact the embassy until she borrowed a stranger's phone at the hostel. Even better, she hadn't bought a return ticket. She was planning to extend her vacation and book a flight home later, probably with more money she expected to sweet-talk out of someone else. Meanwhile, I was gathering my own army. My best friend Lindsay, God bless her, had already started spreading the word in our circle. A friend of hers offered to design a GoFundMe, and within 48 hours, it had gone viral in our small town. The page read, "Single mom's cousin steals her son's surgery fund for a Paris vacation, let's help Tyler." Anyway, the donations came in faster than I could refresh. Comments poured in. Some from people I hadn't seen since high school. Others complete strangers. They were furious. Furious that someone could do that to a child. By the end of the week, we'd raised more than double what I had originally saved, enough not only for Tyler's surgery, but for follow-up visits, therapy sessions, and then some. I scheduled the surgery immediately, and for the first time in months, I exhaled fully. Tyler would be okay. But Amanda wouldn't be. See? While she was pleading with Facebook friends to Venmo her money just until she could get her passport reissued, she forgot one important thing. I had already filed a police report. My attorney had been waiting to serve her the paperwork. And now, with her ID stolen, no funds, and no embassy appointments available for another 10 days, she was stuck, cold, broke, alone, and sobbing in the lobby of a second-rate Paris hostel. The cherry on top. The American embassy wouldn't even issue her emergency documents unless she could prove she had a valid return ticket and somewhere safe to go. She had neither. Her own parents wouldn't front the cost. They'd already had enough of her lies and debts. And I slept soundly for the first time in months. But I wasn't done, because when she finally got back on American soil, the real consequences were just beginning. The moment Amanda landed back on U.S. soil, she was greeted not by loved ones or adoring fans, but by two stern-faced officers from Customs and Border Protection. The second her passport was scanned, a flag popped up linked to an active criminal investigation, financial fraud, theft, and potential wire fraud across state lines. She was led away, bags still on the conveyor belt, into a quiet holding room where she spent the next 2 nights contemplating her life choices. Meanwhile, I was at home, sipping lukewarm coffee while helping Tyler build a Lego castle. My phone buzzed. It was my lawyer. "She's been detained," he said, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in his voice. "We served the case while she was in Paris. They're holding her pending arraignment." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. I should have felt relief, maybe triumph. But all I felt was tired. Tired of being put in positions I never asked for. Tired of cleaning up messes I didn't create. But somewhere beneath that fatigue was a flicker of something sharper: vindication. Amanda was arraigned the next day. Her bail was set. And unsurprisingly, no one in our family was rushing to post it. Eventually, her estranged father paid it, but not without letting everyone know he was done with her for good. She was released under the condition that she not contact me directly, a term I had insisted on. That lasted all of 4 hours. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. "You ruined my life. I just wanted to live my dreams. Tyler would have been fine. Kids bounce back. You're so cold." I blocked the number instantly. But Amanda's spiral didn't stop there. Word of her arrest spread through our extended family like wildfire. And it turned out, I wasn't her only victim. My aunt, her mom's sister, came forward with her own story. Amanda had borrowed $2,000 for medical expenses last year and never paid it back. Another cousin revealed Amanda had convinced him to co-sign a car loan, then defaulted, leaving him with the debt within a week. 2 more relatives had filed police reports, and one added her name to the civil case I was pursuing. The walls were closing in, and fast. Her employer found out about the charges and placed her on administrative leave. Her social media influence tanked almost overnight. Brands quietly pulled out of deals, and PR managers ghosted her. One of her former friends even created a TikTok series called Cautionary Tales Amanda Edition that went semi-viral. People loved a story with a twist. and Amanda had become the villain in hers. But I stayed quiet. No gloating, no public callouts. My focus remained on Tyler, who was healing better than I ever expected. He'd had his surgery the week before Amanda returned, and every day since. He seemed lighter, sleeping deeper, laughing harder, walking taller. Seeing him smile without that constant shadow of pain behind his eyes reminded me why I fought so hard. At night, I'd lie in bed and think back to all the moments I'd nearly given up those long shifts at the diner. The tears in the bathroom at work. The way my hands used to shake every time I opened that savings account. Praying nothing had gone wrong. I thought of how close I came to losing everything. And then I'd think about Amanda, sitting in her parents' basement, jobless, reputation shredded, facing not just my lawsuit, but a web of criminal charges she thought she'd be clever enough to avoid. But this story wasn't over, because even as Amanda's world crumbled, she still believed she could twist her way out of it, and her next move, it was as desperate as it was delusional. About a week after Amanda's release on bail, I received an email, not from her. Thankfully, she still wasn't allowed direct contact, but from her lawyer. Or, rather, a new one, apparently. Her last attorney had dropped her after learning she wasn't planning to be entirely truthful about her finances. This one seemed younger, hungrier, and frankly, more naive. The email was laced with a false sense of professionalism. But the message boiled down to this: Amanda wanted to settle. She was offering to pay back the money she stole, every cent of the $9,400, but over 10 years. Interest-free. Her justification: she was emotionally overwhelmed and unfairly vilified on social media, which had damaged her earning potential. According to her new counsel, she deserved a chance to rebuild her life without being dragged through court. I laughed, out loud, the kind of laugh that comes from a place between disbelief and bitter amusement. 10 years no interest after everything she put Tyler through, after jeopardizing his health, his comfort, his childhood, just so she could take selfies at the Eiffel Tower and sip champagne like she wasn't a thief in designer knockoffs. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. His response was short and glorious. We go to court. The thing about Amanda and people like her is that they mistake kindness for weakness. They assume the people who give second chances will keep giving them forever. But they forget that even the most compassionate hearts have limits. Mine had been crossed the moment she smiled at an airport gate. Holding the money meant for my son's surgery. Court was scheduled. She tried again, this time through her mother, who called me one night begging to think of the family. She said Amanda was not herself when she stole the money. That she'd suffered enough, and that dragging this through court would only hurt Tyler in the long run. That last part almost made me throw the phone across the room. I told her the same thing I told everyone since this began. I wasn't doing this out of revenge. I was doing it so Tyler would one day grow up in a world where people are held accountable. So he'd know that even when you're small and scared and hurt, you can still stand up for yourself. But Amanda, she didn't get it. She never had. As the court date loomed, she posted cryptic quotes on her now private Instagram. Even villains have their side of the story. Forgiveness is strength. Cancel culture is destroying lives. It was pathetic, transparent. The day of the hearing, she showed up wearing all white as if playing the martyr one last time might sway a judge. She clutched her lawyer's arm, head low, lips trembling. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, probably looking for a glimmer of sympathy. She didn't find it. My lawyer laid everything out: the timeline, the account access, the IP logs, the police reports, the photos she posted while my son lay in bed with a delayed surgery. The judge asked Amanda 2 questions. Did you take the money, and what was it intended for, when she tried to deflect? The judge cut her off and asked again. This time, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. It was for her kid. That moment was quiet, but seismic. A courtroom full of strangers watched this woman admit on record that she stole medical funds from a child. The ruling was swift: guilty of financial fraud and civil theft. Full restitution ordered, with penalties, a criminal record that would follow her for years. But the real justice that came after. Because Amanda didn't just lose in court, she lost control. Her social media vanished. Brands publicly severed ties. She was blacklisted from influencer events. Her landlord gave notice. Even her backup job at a marketing firm let her go once HR caught wind of the verdict. She went from Paris to pariah in just under a month. And yet, even as her world collapsed around her, I knew she still believed this was temporary, that she'd bounce back, that eventually people would forget. But not me. I'd never forget. Because justice had been served, but healing was just beginning. Life after the verdict didn't feel like a celebration. There was no parade, no movie-style closure. Just me, standing in my kitchen, staring out the window while the kettle whistled. The storm had passed, but what it left behind was quieter, a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from surviving. Tyler's laughter returned before mine did. After his surgery, his bounce came back. He started running again, kicking his soccer ball in the backyard like nothing ever happened. The scars on his body were healing faster than the ones in my chest. But kids are like that. Resilient, forgiving. In the middle of the chaos, I had wondered whether he'd remember any of it. The canceled surgery, the tight smiles, the missed meals and muffled tears. But children have a beautiful way of letting go when their world feels safe again. I, on the other hand, had to rebuild from the inside out. Therapy became my anchor, not just for the trauma Amanda caused, but for everything I had buried over the years-old wounds from a family that always expected too much and gave too little. My therapist, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Dr. Lang, told me something I'll never forget. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You get to choose who walks through. That sentence alone unraveled years of guilt I hadn't realized I was carrying. I started journaling, not in the flowery, Dear Diary kind of way, but to get the bile out, the rage, the sadness, the exhaustion. Amanda's betrayal had pulled a string that unraveled a tapestry, old memories of being the dependable one. The responsible cousin, the girl who lent money and never asked for it back. I saw it now for what it was, a pattern of emotional theft. She hadn't just stolen money, she had stolen space in my life I never offered. And I wasn't going to let her take any more. As the months passed, Amanda faded from relevance. Her court-mandated repayments were slow and sporadic. She got a job at a local diner, and her wages were garnished, but I didn't need the money. Not anymore. The GoFundMe had changed everything. Friends, strangers, even former high school classmates had donated. Their kindness had lit a candle in the dark. What mattered wasn't getting back the exact dollar amount. It was the principle. And that part, that was secured in ink on court documents and permanent records. Then came the unexpected, a letter. Handwritten, from Amanda. She said she was sorry, that she'd lost everything, her reputation, her job, her dream life, and that she finally understood what she had done. She said Paris had been a disaster from the start, that she felt like a fraud in her own skin, and that for the first time. She was scared of who she was becoming. She asked if I could ever forgive her. I didn't reply. Forgiveness isn't an obligation, it's a gift, and I wasn't ready to give it. Instead, I poured my energy into Tyler. We adopted a dog, he named her Luna, and our little apartment felt more like home than it ever had. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I even submitted a piece to a local art show and got accepted. For the first time in years. My identity wasn't just single mom or the one who got betrayed. I was building something for myself, piece by piece. And here's the wildest part. I no longer felt hate for Amanda. Not even anger. What I felt was detachment. Like watching a stranger from across the street and realizing they once mattered to you. But now you can't quite remember why. That, to me, was freedom. The trauma didn't define me. Neither did the lawsuit. What defined me was how I stood back up, how I protected my son, and how I reclaimed my life. People like Amanda thrive on chaos. They need someone to clean up their mess. But once you stop volunteering for the job, they're forced to look in the mirror. Whether she ever truly changes, I don't know. And honestly, it's not my problem anymore. Because in the end, I didn't just win a legal battle. I reclaimed my voice. I chose peace. I chose us.